Good afternoon and welcome to the first event of 2021 in the RIBA's People, Places and Planets series, sponsored by Ibstock, where we ask you to pause and enjoy a conversation with colleagues. I'm your host, Eleanor Young. I edit the RIBA journal, so those of you who are RIBA members will hopefully regularly pause for a cuppa and to read the magazine about some of the people and places that the team and I have been researching and hopefully visiting each month. And we get the planet in there too. That's a really critical thing to be talking about, how to deal with the climate emergency. So I need to start with a few housekeeping points. Tips to make sure you have a good experience today. You'll all be muted when you join the event. You probably realise that by now. If you want to ask a question, and I hope you do, please type it into the Q&A, the chat that you should see alongside or be able to throw up alongside by pressing on a little kind of messenger icon. Please say who you are and the company you work for in case we need to get back to you after the event. If we don't get a time for all the questions, we'll try and respond to you after. And just so you know, the event will be recorded and we're expecting it to be a YouTube sensation. So you're all here to listen to Marvin Rees. It's a great opportunity to get an insight into his journey and his thinking about Bristol and the challenges and opportunities that face this city. We're going to get to that and to your questions to him and mine. But first, I will introduce you to Marvin and give you a bit of overview about some of the things going on in Bristol at the moment. So let's start with Marvin himself. He's been mayor here since 2016. Second mayor of Bristol in a new era of directly elected mayors who've got an unprecedented strong hand in negotiating deals with central government and with the private sector. It's more influence than actual power, but there's a lot that can be done with it. In May, it's time for Bristol to vote again. Marvin said he'll be standing again as Labour candidate. In his career, he's moved from development work through journalism, I would pick up on that, as he gradually equipped himself for government, including a stint in the NHS, which now seems a very necessary preparation for politics, something we wish more of our politicians had, and also working for greater racial justice through Operation Black Vote. In fact, shockingly, Marvin is the first elected mayor of Black African heritage of a major European city. This really means something, not just for Bristol as a diverse city, but for Europe and the UK. Especially as in 2020, we saw Black Lives Matter raise our awareness of the endemic racism in our society. And when COVID has taken an unfair toll on Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. Bristol has been in the headlines nationally, something to be proud of, as the statue of philanthropist and better known as slave trader Edward Colston was tumbled into the harbour. And Bristol has a mayor who can speak clearly with a balanced way with authority on this. And just on Colston, it's good to know that Colston Hall has a new name, Bristol Beacon, all ready for when it opens after Levitt Bernstein's £50 million refurb, which is currently scheduled for this year. Obviously, don't book your tickets yet. As we're talking under the banner of the RIBA's People, Places, Planet series, it's fitting that we mention Marvin's recent Honorary Fellowship from the RIBA for his contribution to housing in the city. His biography tells me that in his 5-year tenure, 8,000 new homes have been delivered in Bristol. I wish I'd done all the sums and worked that out, but it does seem a remarkable figure compared to the national picture. It has perhaps also gone some way towards tackling Bristol's rate of homelessness, which was double the national average when Marvin took over in 2016. The council-owned housing company Gorham Homes has been leading the charge and has, I think, 2,500 houses, a delivery of 2,500 houses planned for 2025. And it's been a great supporter of homes experimentation through the Bristol Housing Festival, including some live demonstrations, trying to try out different ways of building and mixing communities. So yes, of course, there has been containers, but also other ways of thinking about housing. If you take a flight around the city with the council's promotional video, the number of homes and the percentage of affordable homes are as much part of the presentation as the jobs to be created. And some of the figures are really impressive. 50% affordable on at least one development in Lockleys, though maybe the normal number is more 20 to 30% that I picked up. Marvin has followed hard on the heels of Bristol architect turned mayor George Ferguson, and some of the projects we'll hear about shortly have been given impetus by George's purchase of key development sites, which has allowed the city to exercise far more power as a landowner than it can always do as a planning authority. One of the key ones is Temple Quarter Enterprise Zone, perhaps the most public of the city's major development sites to anyone arriving by train, at least from Temple Mead Station, which lands you into the heart of it. At the moment, it's full of light industrial sheds, car rentals, building suppliers, some really notable historic walls, very solid, but all between empty parking lots. With the West of England Combined Authority and Homes England, it's in line for transformation. The first buildings out of the ground will be Bristol University's new campus, new city campus, which is briefed to mix innovation and community, bring people in to see some of the innovation, those who are collaborating, and just the people who live nearby, with some major buildings, including ones by Field and Clegg Bradley Studio. So it's set around a couple of squares, new squares, and greening up Totterdown Basin. So it's easy to imagine students filling the space, though at the moment it's a welter of lorries kind of rolling over the remains of the old sorting office. So Temple Island, that's obviously been in the news over time as Arena Island, and there are new bridges there, once planned to carry crowds into the Bristol Arena. They don't really lead to anywhere at the moment, of course, but one day there will be 500 new flats by Zaha Hadid Architects and a fair number, I mean a lot, of student rooms designed by AHMM. And a development plan for the quarter is due before Bristol's cabinet in mid-March, I think. So a few other things that are going on in the city. There's that other big transport hub, the M32, that's getting the development treatment as Froome Gateway. HTA is designing a master plan on the section down towards Cabot Circus, designed to be super green, centred on the River Froome. Marvin was one of those who fought hard to win Channel 4's presence in the city, and last year its creative hub opened at Finzel's Reach, where the development keeps going. On the opposite bank of the Avon, across the Swirly Brook and alongside the park, is Castle Park View, designed by Chapman Taylor. Anyone who knows that will know it will certainly become a landmark in the city. It's a 26-storey tower and a small 10-storey block, both fronting onto the park, which is already up a rise. Then there's Lockleys, Bedminster Green, Western Harbour, and a good few more areas besides undergoing major development, some with controversial changes, including rethinking the road systems and dramatic increases in density. We also know, along with housing and general economic development, sharing the wealth of the city centre with the whole city, you have to have good transport. There is still a long promised mass transport plan, with the routes still appearing clearer than the means of transport, but it has the potential to unlock access to jobs as well as gridlock on the roads, so we watch for announcements with interest. With an ongoing global pandemic, which you may have noticed, the question has become how this city in particular, can persuade developers that this is the right place to put their money and help the people of Bristol. Without drivers of retail, without drivers of leisure and a major economic downturn underway, can the case for investment be sustained? And when we build, will we be doing so for the long term? Will projects help the twin crises of inequality and climate emergency? Will houses and flats benefit the health of their residents? Will they benefit the health of the planet? With COP, I've forgotten the number, COP 22, could it be? With a major climate summit coming to Glasgow next year, later this year rather, that's a really important thing to be thinking about. So Bristol's been characterised as creating some great places, but without great individual buildings. Think of the way that Queen Square and Bristol Harbourside have become such treasured parts of the city. Is the city and its cash-strapped council doing enough to proactively, through planning policy and persuasion, to encourage the creation of both buildings and places of high quality? There are limited resources, but this is something that seems to be really important where there's development. It will be interesting to hear what Marvin thinks are the most significant of these development projects and the sort of development, the sort of city he envisages as one of the few influencers and decision makers with involvement in so many parts of the city. Do you want a central business district and suburbs, or close-knit city streets and fine grain? What role does the built environment have in making a happy, successful city, especially at a time of such huge stress? So there's a few questions to think about, Marvin. With that, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and pass it over to you. Thanks. I'll be back for questions later.
All right. You caused me all sorts of problems there with my talk because there's so many things I'd love to respond to, but maybe you can pick some of those up in the chat. So I in the note I was given, I've got a couple of questions I was asked to start with, and then I'll talk about this. The city, one about my journey to mayor, if you still want me to do that, and then and think the places that have inspired me. You asked me for people, but I've kind of dropped the people and I've gone for the places because that does inform my approach to being a mayor. So the immediate journey to mayor, the easier description is to say I came into politics through Operation Black Vote. As you mentioned at the beginning, Operation Black Vote started in the 90s as an organisation committed to getting more Black and Asian people involved in the democratic process, very low levels of voter participation. That moved into not just getting people to vote, but to supporting people into positions of public leadership. Members of Parliament, there was an MP shadow scheme that I participated in back in 2006, but also trying to get people from Black and Asian backgrounds to come forward to become magistrates. And also to take up public appointments. So I ended up taking up a public appointment on the National Community Forum under Hazel Blears's leadership then, which was community activists from around the country there to support and to make recommendations on government policy, around communities and community development. So I came in through Operation Black Vote and had a very seminal moment, actually, that I had sworn off mainstream, what I called anything mainstream. I thought it was corrupting, and could not be saved. But Simon Woolley, the director of OBV, said to me, you've got a great analysis, Marvin, on why the world is rubbish, but what are you actually going to do about it? And that is an ongoing challenge I have for people who come to me. It's easy to point out the failures. You've got to get your definitions right, but we need solutions. And people like my mum that grew up in poverty haven't got time for cheese and wine parties where we lament how crap politics is. We've got to get something done. And I think Bloomberg would have pointed this about in New York. At the city leadership level, it gets very pragmatic. And you know what? Sometimes you've got to put things in and they're not perfect, but they are better than nothing for people who need to eat, need shelter, need a job today. That doesn't mean you give up on the ideal and the perfect. You constantly shoot for that, but you know, another friend of mine says you can't boil the ocean. You know, you got to do what you can get done. So I ran in 2012 and lost, and I ran again in 2016, and obviously came out with a victory that time. My inspiration suggested the positive, but actually my drivers come from both positive and negative places. All right. If I go back to the negatives, much of my political drive comes from what it was like to grow up in Bristol. The brown child of an unmarried white woman given birth in 1972 with no money, from a poor family, with everything that went along with that. I lived in a refuge with my mum, and we essentially grew up poor. Before I was born, there was serious advice that my mum, if she was a good woman, would either have me aborted or give me up for adoption. So it's born into hostile circumstances in many ways. And really much of my politics comes from, I don't want people to have to deal with that kind of nonsense where not just the circumstances of their birth, but the themes that then characterize their developmental years tell them that they are worth less than other people. And I grew up in a city that told me that. So actually, and I will say that sometimes when I've heard of this, I've come across this profession of urbanists. And I'm not saying urbanists aren't good, but I did watch a presentation once in which someone was talking about fantastic looking buildings. And my point was, looking at fantastic buildings without understanding the social context in which those buildings exist, you miss out loads, because what to you is a beautiful building, to me becomes a symbol of my exclusion. And I will say that to thousands of people that look like me and live life like me across issues of race and class becomes important. So we have to take account of poverty, alienation and social inequality. The positive, I would say, one, I would actually say living in a refuge was positive because it talked to me about community, and it was, and I was nostalgia for it. But I also spent some time in the Arctic. I went on an expedition, and I say that because all I had when I was up in Spitsbergen was a tent, food, clothes, and friends, and I was content. I was flourishing, and that caused me pause for thought. What is the life that flourishes, right? And what do we need to flourish as human beings? And to me, it is about community and inclusion. And I would also say, equality, which is what we're pushing for here. Inclusion, not everyone being the same, but a society that is inclusive, and everything in that society pushes inclusion. Now, a friend of mine, a Lebanese friend of mine, said to me, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And when we have Bristol, this is the way I see our challenges. We have a housing crisis that is a crisis of huge significance, as you will all be aware. But we've got to meet that housing crisis in the face of a city that is going to grow by 90 to 100,000 people over the next 25 years. We have to meet that housing crisis in the face of a climate emergency, an ecological emergency, what I think is a crisis of democracy. And we've seen the potential weakness of our democracy in the United States. Systems look strong until they're shown not to be that strong. So we shouldn't take our strength for granted. And I think what COVID is doing is it will unleash greater forces driving us towards even greater inequality. Those who are on the margins of our economy will be hit first and hardest by COVID and the consequences of lockdown, and they will be least well placed to benefit from any upturn in the economy when it comes. Overall, it will mean greater inequality. That is the context in which we pursue our policy solutions and our ideals. And to be honest, it takes the wisdom of Solomon to navigate a way through that. I don't have that level of wisdom, which is why you need good teams and people like RIBA and all the rest of people contributing to our solutions. If I can just stick in here a response to one of your points, how do cities then advertise themselves, as it were, as the places for the inward investment that will allow them to meet those challenges? I think that's kind of self-enforcing in this much. It's really important that we as cities pursue development in a way that builds our resilience to future shocks, be they climate shocks, political shocks, economic shocks, social shocks. So we have to be more resilient, while at the same time building systems that reduce the contribution we make to the likelihood of future shocks. That's not lifestyle change. I think that takes a fundamental job of reconceptualizing, replanning and rebuilding cities over 15, 20-year cycles. And one of the pieces of work I've been involved with, the World Economic Forum, is how can we identify new financial vehicles that will go on that 15, 20-year journey with cities so they can actually, by their very nature, decarbonize their systems, right? So you don't have to think about living a low impact life, because the water system, the waste system, the transport system, the energy system you rely on is decarbonized, right? We have to go beyond an individual decision and people with a bit of spare disposable income to put a heat source pump in and and buy locally sourced organic. So it's fundamentally rethinking what cities are and then proactively, intentionally building those decarbonized collections of systems that our cities are. But I think that in the future, investment will be looking for resilient places to land. They will, you know, the mayor of Helsinki said he wants to create the most functional city in the world. He said, now that doesn't sound kind of sexy, like, I hope I can use that term, you know, the most sustainable city. But he says, in an increasingly unstable world, functionality has become incredibly attractive. Your trains run on time. Your power supply is predictable. And so I think that resilient cities will be attractive to inward investment, giving them the capacity to improve their resilience and reduce the contribution they make to the likelihood of future shocks. House building is going to be one of those systems we have to get on top of. And one of the challenges I share with Bristol is that the kind of homes we build and where we build them will be one of the biggest determinants of our planetary impact. Building sustainable homes 4 miles away from employment zones, retail zones, entertainment zones will not help. I think we have to take on the challenge of building more densely and more centrally, but doing that well. If we don't, you know, and we build homes far away, we are building into it distance and dependence on transport, particularly in a city that's going to grow by 100,000. And as I've said to some of the lobbyists that don't want houses built, not building homes is not an option. We could end up in a situation where we have housing riots in the future. Or certainly if we don't build homes, we will create the conditions for increasing political instability because of resentment in the face of an economy that's growing, but is not providing the very basics, as in a warm home for the people that live in that country. So we have to deliver that. We've put housing at the centre of our policy platform. As you said, I mean, it's about 8,000 homes since 1,200 council homes. We've got our own housing company now that we're bringing developments through on. If you look at a scheme like Hengrove, we secured £33 million for that scheme. It's going to deliver over 1,400 homes. That site has been identified for housing since the 80s. Should have happened a long time ago. We brought it through now. Bearing in mind, again, silly politics gets involved. It was called in as soon as it was announced, you know, for some political gain, but we've come through now. And we're doing that in the face of the challenge of COVID and Brexit as well, which is impacting on delivery. We have been prepared to try things out as well. Some of you may have seen the Zed Pod scheme, 11 homes built on stilts above a car park in St. George for young people at risk of homelessness. That is Bristol Housing Festival linking up with YMCA and ourselves. Launchpad, young people and students living in the same homes, again, co-mentoring, proactively building community. Bonington Walk, biodiversity net gain, 50% affordable. You know, we're really driving at building these, bringing these home. Boklok, Skanskas, working with Skanska, the first time they've developed MMC housing in the UK, 200 homes going on Airport Road in Bristol. The final thing I'll say just to pay off is we've developed a plan in Bristol called the One City Plan that looks forward to 2050. We want to be intentional about what we want to be. A friend of mine says, make a plan, any plan, just make a bloody plan, right? And before we didn't have a plan that looked beyond 4 or 5 years within the city. You can't approach the future like that. And what we've done with our One City Plan is we measured it against the Global Sustainable Development Goals, which will be a central feature of COP26. But now we've made a subtle but significant change of saying not how do we merely measure ourselves against the SDGs, but how do we make sure that everything we do in Bristol actually delivers the SDGs. And yesterday I was on a call with our brand new ambassador to the United Nations, talking about the contribution and the leadership role cities will play in delivering the SDGs, leading in a way that actually national governments are proving themselves unable to do. And you will see increasingly over the build up to COP, I believe, and I pressed them to say that we need to make this announcement at COP, that we need to move global governance into its next iteration. And that will involve the leaders of cities and networks of cities as equal partners in shaping national and international policy. So city development is going to be about the physical, it's going to be about the social, building more inclusive economies. But I think increasingly you're going to be seeing those cities equipped to step into global governance roles because we basically got 10 years to get this right. And if we miss that window, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Increasingly, people are recognizing that now. I'd be happy to talk more, and I know I didn't talk on race and housing, but I'm happy to do some of that stuff in the Q&A as well.
Thanks very much, Marvin. I don't think I'm on yet. Yes, I'm on. Thanks very much, Marvin. You've really drawn out some of the issues and also where you're coming from on it, which is really powerful. In fact, I think you have, you know, by stepping back and saying, what are we actually trying to do? You put some concerns into a certain sort of perspective. I think it would be good to get some questions from the audience, and I'm looking at the Q&As and I can't see any coming through, but I think we'll start with something from me. If you are in the audience, please do put your questions up. You're engaged here, you're living here, studying here, or in the Bristol or the Southwest, or perhaps working on some of the sites we've discussed, no doubt affected by the issues that have been talked about. What do you want to know from Marvin? So my first question was really about how Bristol Festival of Housing had contributed, and what are your next moves on tackling the housing crisis in the city? I think you've talked about the Festival of Housing and some of the innovations, and you've talked about what's been delivered. What is the next move? I mean, is it in your hands? Just remember to unmute yourself, Marvin.
Yeah. Nothing's totally in my hands. I think the point you made earlier on was very welcome, actually. It's more influence than it is direct power, right? Which is probably healthy anyway. So there are a lot of things we depend on. In fact, my chief constable here, or the chief constable, Andy Marsh, said world-class public leadership today is more about what you influence than what you control. So, but I mean, for the housing festival, just by way of background, that really is a special approach brought to us by Jeremy Sweetland, a former lawyer who came up with an idea, and we basically backed him on it, you know, and he delivered. So in 2018, when we hosted the Global Parliament and Mayors, he put 6 modular homes up on the waterfront for people to come see and try out, and then that moved into Launchpad and Zed Pods, and now Bocklock. And again, it's just we've just found good people and backed them, and now we've developed a bit of a reputation for being a leader on MMC homes. I guess the next big thing coming through on that, the next big things are Bocklock, 200 odd homes on Airport Road, MMC, and LNG with Bonington Walk as well, and it's proof of concept. I mean, it'd be very interesting to watch Zed Pods as well, because they went up in like 3 or 4 days once they were on site. And again, it's putting up homes for a specific purpose, to build a community for young people who are at risk of homelessness. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see if it works, and if it does, we'll put more. You know, we'll explore more Zed Pod opportunities. But beyond that, it's just continuing with the drive to build homes. I would also say what we don't want to do is take our eye off the ball of fixing our existing stock of homes as well, across the public and private sector, retrofitting to make sure that they are zero carbon, that they are warm homes, and that we don't have people facing the choice of fuel and food.
How do you go about that as mayor? How do you encourage that? How do you push it? Is it public messaging, or is it dealing with your own council stock?
For our existing stock? Yeah,
retrofitting.
Oh well, I mean, there are a number of fronts. One is we've got a program coming through called City Leap. It's called Leap because it is about a leap. It's a chapter change in the way that we relate to energy. It's a £1 billion package of investments coming through that will lead to renewables, distribution, storage, and smart use of energy. But part of that City Leap is a retrofit scheme for the city, so we'll try and mobilise resource that way. But also, one of the points we've been making to government is that they need to front load their investment in green infrastructure right now. We need the generation of jobs. I mean, Biden's taken this approach on anyway. Generate jobs, but also you decarbonize the very economic systems that will begin to pick up a pace when the economy begins to pick up again. So as we want the economy to pick up pace, we need to make sure that the consequences of that are not, we minimise the impact that has on the planet. And so we think it makes sense to bring programs like retrofit forward right now into 2021 and drive them with a real sense of urgency.
I'm just going to move on to transport, if that's all right. So I've got a question, and I also want to bring in a question from landscape architect Will Day, who's based in Bristol. So my question is really about the proposition for mass transit routes, and a kind of sort of lack of clarity on that at the moment, though I know things are coming forward. Some attempts to develop walking routes like the Brunel Mile, and whether those are enough. And I just want to read out Will's as well. Starts off very interesting. Obviously a connection between his family and you, Marvin. My eldest son was very inspired when Marvin visited his primary school and was asked about Brexit and responded by saying it's the wrong answer to the right question. I wonder if the proposal for the Bristol Underground system is also the wrong answer to the right question, given that an underground system is hugely more costly than, for instance, a tram system, takes people away from street level and has a vastly higher carbon footprint in relation to its construction, which would eat into the carbon targets. It's also clear that people are less inclined to travel in a confined space in a COVID-affected world. Trams also take up space that cars use at street level, which is a beneficial thing. Bristol really does need a public transport system to unlock the city, but is Bristol Underground system the wrong answer to the right question? Do you have a response to that, Marvin? You need to unmute yourself, Marvin.
I said, I see what you're doing there. You're doing some jujitsu with my own phraseology around Brexit. So, first of all, the system is going through. So, going through the whole process now. So we've gone through a first stage of review, desktop review. Obviously, cost a bit of money with combined authority, and this March we'll be out with the second report, which looks at the finances of it, and how deliverable it is in terms of engineering. Everything's positive so far. The specific technology to be used is yet to be decided, because that will fall out of the plan. I would just defend myself a little bit, if I can. There is no confusion from my part. We said what we would do is we would explore it, and then we'll go through the whole process that DFT requires to go through. Then what happens is it falls into the realm of superficial journalism and political speculation, and it becomes a collection of rumours. The system is the system, and we are working through it. But I think there is a passion for trams, but I'm more than happy to have a conversation. But I just don't think trams will work. If we were to put a tram up Church Road, we'd have to knock down loads of buildings up inside Church Road to make it wide enough. That is phenomenally inconvenient, which is not just inconvenient in terms of movement, it's cost. Purchasing the buildings, it disrupts the transport flow. I think you'd end up with a very angry and disillusioned city. We saw what happened in Edinburgh. So my kind of thoughts are that the trams won't work. I think when we first started talking about going underground as an option, and parts of it underground, parts of it overground, by the way, it's not all under. One of the first bits of findings that came back was actually the cost of tunnelling has changed quite dramatically over the years, because the technology has moved on. And we've got companies coming to us now proposing new technologies that are being developed around the world that could be applied in Bristol, and they want to bring to the city. I think freeing up the road surface is also for walking and cycling is also really attractive. I think trams can look good, but I think the inconvenience of delivery and freeing up the road surface for people is also very attractive. The advantage of an underground as well is that you're not locked into the existing road system. So, for example, if we wanted to follow the Gloucester Road route and then veer off and have a stop directly at Southmead Hospital to make sure that that is accessible, we could do that. You have a lot more freedom in where you go, technology allowing. But everything will go through the wash. Everything will go through the system. If it's practically doable and financially deliverable, then it will happen. Then it will happen, and that's the commitment we've made, just to go on that journey.
Thank you. That's helpful to hear that it will go through the proper processes and it's not all decided yet. So you make a strong case for underground. I can just hear feedback. That's all. We don't have that many questions from you as an audience. I'd really like to hear some more things from you. You've got the experience of the city. You maybe are looking at it from afar and able to compare it to other cities. So do give us your questions. We'll come to Chris Roots in a minute. So first comes to talk about about Temple Quarter. So there are cranes all over the city, and there's Temple Quarter with its local enterprise money and the university developing it. How important is it to Bristol? It's just central. Is it important? Marvin. Can't hear you, Marvin.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Oh, I think it's massively significant. I mean, it's surprising we've got by all these years really without getting our. I mean, the train station is one of the developments at the heart of this, without having a modern train station to cope with the needs of a modern city. But the benefits are massive. It helps. We can really develop that as a transport hub as well, mass transit. As well as the attractiveness of Temple Meads to show our national and international connectivity. In and of itself, it can be a massive driver of jobs, which we desperately need right now. People need economic hope. There's an opportunity to deliver over 10,000 homes across the whole Temple Quarter patch, and to be very intentional about the way we build the city. I think it also helps us when I listed that collection of challenges earlier on, of housing crisis, sustainability crisis, ecological crisis, inequality, that development is one of the places in which we can be very intentional about solving the whole complex of those challenges by building entertainment, housing, employment, all within active travel distance of each other, higher density in the middle of the city. And I think it also reputationally adds to the city's growing reputation, as this is a place where you can come and get stuff done. And when we first came in, we had feedback direct from Homes England that the city's reputation wasn't that great for getting real things done. Bristol was a city that succeeded despite itself, was the reputation. But now, one of the big conversations we had to have with developers is that we do want to get things done.
Yeah. I think it's funny, from Homes England, you have a lot of land that is very, very developed, that you have to take a little lecture from them. But obviously Temple Quarter has been around as an idea for a long time in one form or other. So I guess those questions are of relevance. I just want to come to Chris Root's question, which it could be related in some way to that. Does Bristol have a significant stock of vacant industrial buildings suitable for redevelopment as housing? Have you seen buildings around that could work?
Yeah, I mean, there are I mean, exact number on that, I'd have to check with the regen team. But it does speak into another challenge that we do have to be careful. When I came in, I was pretty gung-ho, let's get houses built. But one of the pushbacks was we also have to protect employment land too. So even if we think about Temple Quarter, there's a lot of industrial land down there. A lot of those jobs, to be perfectly frank, working class jobs, entry level jobs. There's a gas company down there, delivers Cala gas bottles. We've met with them and they're very concerned about the development. So again, it's how we hold those things together. So we do want to transfer buildings and land where it's appropriate, but we have to do it within the context of protecting employment land around the city as well. People need homes and jobs, and so that's the approach we're trying to map out.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I guess it's a question now with COVID, what is actually going to drive development? City centres need to radically reinvent themselves. I mean, that's the feeling of people. They're obviously not going in at the moment. There aren't any shops open. Even when they were, there's a kind of hesitancy. We're not completely I mean, we are sure it won't eradicate COVID completely. So it kind of changes the way we use our kind of high density leisure, retail. They're all in problems. Universities may be investing significantly less. So what's left to drive and fund regeneration? Can you offer any hope?
Well, I hope so. Look, this comes into me to this question of needing to go on 15, 20-year journeys with cities, rather than patch and mend, project here, development there, approach. So I sit on the World Economic Forum's Future Global Cities board, and the topic I suggested that we now have a subgroup on is on city finance, not local government finance, city finance. So how cities can begin to get in touch with the scale of finance we need to reconceptualize what we are, plan and rebuild. Now, within that framework, if we can take the 15-year journey, and there is a financial vehicle that will go on that journey with us, within that framework, we can say that this is the way the city is going to look like in 20 years, because that's what we're pointing at. Because this is a decarbonised city, a city with green space, with biodiversity that's inclusive, with mixed, balanced communities. That's something that we're really pushing to be on the table for COP. As I was talking to the ambassador yesterday, we need to talk about the how of COP, not just national governments making declarations. And I think there's an appetite for that. Now, if we are able to come up with that kind of framework, then developers, investors can be confident that, hey, there is a plan. And this is what the plan looks like, and this is the context within which your development will look. And it will take into account what we need city centres to be, which will be, a much more, a stronger blend of residential, destination and retail, because we have too much retail space within the city. It will take into account, which I think is an ongoing need for communities, the need for local economic hubs. Can't just have houses without any high street, as it were, or some kind of economic hub to them. So we'll be able to very intentionally plan. I think what I've said with the World Economic Forum is, if I think of a city like Bristol, it's been around a couple of thousand years. Our cities have generally grown development by development without an overarching plan for what we want to be in 30 years' time. We need to change that, because the world cannot afford to stumble forward anymore. We need to be a very intentional plan about how, what life is going to be like and how it's going to function for the cities in which most of the world's population are going to live. And so I want that level of intentionality in our plan, and I hope that we'll be able to get alignment between national governments, international investors, local investors and planners to deliver those kind of cities in the future. That's the golden up end of it, right? On a very basic level, on a day-to-day, we have with the combined authority our city centre revitalisation group, planning the city centres today. I was talking to Nuala Gallagher today, and our high streets plan for plots around the city with the very drivers within our own One City plan is to deliver the SDGs. So that hopefully will create a framework in which our developers can have more confidence that we are building a resilient city as much as we possibly can. I've lost sound, Eleanor.
It's me.
Hi,
it's just me. Sorry, because the background sound, we're muting and unmuting ourselves so that the conversation can't be quite as slick, perhaps, it might be normally. So we've got a lot of questions coming through now at the last minute. Just as we're due to finish, I'm just looking at whether we maybe continue for just a few more. Yeah? Okay, we're going to just continue for a few more minutes and get through some of those questions. So a kind of quick fire answers I'm going to ask for, and I'll do the questions in a short way as well. So from someone, we don't know who this is from, but Marvin, everything you've said sounds great. Can I ask your thoughts on how we maintain quality when we do retrofit and densify our cities? So that's two big questions there about maintaining quality houses and buildings and densify our cities.
Well, actually, that speaks to one of the challenges I think there have been with the government's permitted development rights and loosening the ability of local authorities to influence what goes on in their patch. Our point to government is you're solving a problem we don't have. We don't have a problem with getting planning through. What we have is a problem with getting existing plots built out when the planning's given. So I am really concerned about a values-free dash for growth, both in terms of the broader economy, but also in the physical development of a place. So I think what I've said as an alternative, which I hope answers this question, but we can pick these up outside, is one of our challenges is capacity within our team to make sure that we're actually on top of what's going on to get the standards that we need in our developments at the quality we need them to be in those negotiations. We're trying to wrap everything we do, as I said earlier on, around the global sustainable development goals: inequality, poverty, biodiversity, carbon emissions. Good, and SDG 11 is all about communities and spaces. So we're doing our best to wrap ourselves around that, not just in the one city plan, but in our own strategy as a local authority as well. And hopefully that will drive those qualities in. I will say that whenever I've spoken on a forum like this, I've said to developers, come to us with your own plans wrapped around how you're going to help us deliver the SDGs. So we're all pointing in the same direction at the same time.
Yeah, and just has that happened? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying we've had a silver bullet, but there's been a warm response from certainly a number of developers. The guys involved in Gardner Haskins, for example, regen program, had already put the SDGs within their business model, their delivery model, and for them it was a great alignment. Our point to government has been, you need to help us push these SDGs into everything we do now as the framework to make sure that our future planning is covered by the right kind of values we need.
Yeah. So we've got Jameson Goring. Hi, I'm based in London. So this is about the expansion of city government, I think. I'm interested in what your relationship is currently with other cities and what influence you can collectively have over central government policies, something you've hinted you're working at. Is there a possible future where cities have increased powers as independent municipalities in the wake of a dysfunctional, defunct centralised system? I think I know the answer to this. It begins with why. It's got to be yes.
Yeah, but I would just change one word in that. I wouldn't say it's independent, I'd say it's interdependent municipalities. Yeah. So in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says the childlike state is dependence. Then you grow up and you become independent. And when you fully mature, you realize you're interdependent and you begin behaving like that. And I think what cities are saying is we're interdependent. Bristol is a city of 180 countries of origin, 92 languages. What happens in Lagos is of immediate concern to people in Bristol because there are people whose families, brothers and sisters in Lagos, right? We have a big Somali population in Bristol. They do in Minneapolis, right? Family connections. They're concerned about what happens in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. So cities offer a different kind of way of thinking about the world, and that is being exploited now. If I can just say, there are vehicles, Global Parliament of Mayors, C40, Mayors Migration Council, Core Cities, US Conference of Mayors. There are increasing numbers of national and international city networks that are seeking to influence national and international policy.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen, as with states in the US, there's a different way of thinking. You can be counter the kind of central government and be working quite far ahead, and that's particularly noticeable on the climate emergency. Got a question here from David Lum. How much more can you do to tap into the untapped resources of the citizens of Bristol in terms of delivering solutions and actions now to respond to post-pandemic and climate crises? I mean, as a kind of coming up from community activism, you probably have a good idea about that.
Well, we've tried it. So a number of things. We launched the Citizens Assembly just two weekends ago. So they're coming through with their policy recommendations. We have developed around this one city plan, which I kind of recommend everyone has a look at, just at least. We developed a culture called Make Us a Big Offer, Make a Big Ask. Again, coming from my background is, I get elected, but that doesn't mean I'm going to come around in the morning, tie your shoelaces up and, tell you to put your left foot in front of your right foot. my approach to politics is we've got to make people powerful, not dependent. So we've developed a culture called make us a big offer and make a big ask. So don't just come and say, Marvin, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? Clearly, I've got to do stuff about stuff, right? But come and make an offer to the city, then tell the city what you need from it to enable that offer to be delivered. So an example around hunger, Andy Street, who's a businessman, set up SLR Consulting, waste management company in the 80s. It's a global business. But he said, I can end child hunger, but this is what I need from the city to enable me to do that. I need access to children's centres, primary schools. I need access to political support, blah, blah, blah. We've got a fantastic system in place to get food out to children, which is one of the reasons we haven't had the crisis of food that COVID has brought to other places. We haven't solved it, but we've got a fantastic network that brings public, voluntary sector and business together to tackle food. Even when we didn't get money from government, we raised over £125,000 within the city and got 55,000 meals out to tackle summer holiday hunger. Phenomenal. So make a big offer, make a big ask. It is how we've really begun to tap into that community spirit. I come from the voluntary sector as well, and we've worked with the voluntary sector as well to have a real intentional plan about the size and breadth of the voluntary sector we want in the future. And when I say that, there's an important line. It's not a voluntary sector of the gaps. We're not saying to the voluntary sector, wherever the public sector cannot be, will you please step up? We think a thriving voluntary sector is a good in and of itself. It's evidence of community power, it's local leadership, and the voluntary sector can often deliver in ways to people that public services cannot or will not. I certainly experienced that when I was working in mental health services. So we really are trying to mobilise that community voice. But again, we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
So Nigel Dyke from Alec French has got a good question about balance. I just want to widen it out. So his is about the nighttime economy, but also about protecting the high street. I suppose my question, which I kind of want to put in, is that how do you balance keeping a sustainable and strong economic city? I think you've made the case that there is that if you build the right sort of city, or if you have the right sort of city, you can get people to bring their money there when necessary, and you can build on that. So protecting the high street, first question, and how can architects be part of the sustainable conversation around Bristol as the sort of second and final question? So protecting the high street first.
Yeah, so we actually over the last 2 days we've been finalising a further list of high streets and local centres across the city that we're taking forward to combined authority. I'll be raising it tomorrow, which is a kind of a roadmap of delivery of investments across our high streets that we want to see rolling out. We want to be very intentional about those. So it's, again, looking at the mix on the high street. We want to protect the retail, have destinations, residential, and so forth. So that work is happening right now. How architects can
be part of the sustainable conversation. Yeah. Well,
we've got this one city plan, and we've got these thematic boards delivering across 6 areas that make up the overall plan: children, transport and connectivity, health and well-being, economy, environment, and homes and communities, right? I would welcome a chance for architects in the city to come together to help us properly define the challenges. Now, like I said, problem well defined is a problem half solved. I think one of the political problems in the city that we've had is that people have got different understandings of what the challenge is. Some people miss off issues of race, for example, or they come up with solutions that aren't class or income sensitive. They just think if I do something nice, everyone can access it, and that's just, and they don't take account of the city's fractured history. It's one of my kind of frustrations. I would welcome a conversation with architects from Bristol, and we could run some Zoom sessions in which we could run special sessions on the city plan. But at any time, they could take the one city plan and actually say, do you know what, as I can see what you're trying to do there, we've got a solution on this. So one of the things we want to do is build a child-friendly city. So what does that mean? You know, what do architects say a child-friendly city looks like physically, but also what do architects need to happen in the social fabric of a city in terms of its social policy to make what they want to do architecturally good, you know, and not misunderstood and not misplaced and not a symbol of exclusion, for example. So I think being involved in helping us define the challenge and then developing the solutions, we're open doors to that.
Thank you very much. That's a good way to end this, and to say sort of a moment of action, hopefully, for those who are listening. Thanks very much to Marvin and to you in the audience for good questions there. It's been an enlivening conversation. I also want to say thank you to Ibstock, sponsor for today's event. We have Chris, Josh and Graham from Ibstock with us today, and their details are in the chat if you'd like to get in touch. Also in the chat are links to our upcoming events. On 18th February, we're talking to leading experts, not me, somebody else. They're going to talk to each other maybe, about sustainable architectural design and share knowledge and tools to address the climate crisis in climate literacy for architects. And on the 9th of March, we have award-winning architect Alison Brooks telling us about her work. So we're posting the links for the registration in the chat, so sign up if you're interested, or you can always find out more at the RIBA website, architecture.com, which also has a wide range of resources and advice, including on COVID and how to deal with some of the implications. Thanks again, Marvin, for your very interesting and enlightening answers, and to you, the audience. Enjoy your lunch. Goodbye.